Hello, and welcome to the webinar today. My name is Roland, and I'm one of the organizers of Wealth Forum that's going to take place in Estonia. And we have a very special guest today, and there's a very and really important topic that we're going to cover today. And the guest of us today is Chris Martenson. So you probably have seen that there's a lot of things going on in the financial system that are unsustainable, not sustainable, and there's a lot of warning signs that something is really happening or something is wrong with that. And we have had a lot of people asking from us that when the crisis is coming, and how to prepare for that, and what should I do. So that's exactly what we're going to cover today with Chris. And so the main topics that we're going to cover today are, first of all, why the next crisis is coming and why it's called to be the greatest wealth transformation in history. Also, we're going to cover how you can prepare for the crisis and how you can actually also benefit from that. So let's get right into that. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Roland. Good to be here.
Can you give us a short overview of your story and so.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I began my life as a research scientist, and I was a research scientist at Duke University. I studied cell biology and neuroengineering, and what came from that for me was I learned how to study data. So I'm a scientist at heart, right? I love science, I love data. So I started gathering data, and around 2000 and 2001, my portfolio was just getting shredded like everybody. And at this point, I'm already working my way up through I've gotten an MBA at this point in time. I'm working in corporate finance for a while. Then I worked as vice president of a large company called SAIC. Doing strategy and strategy work for large corporations, but I got curious about what was going on with my portfolio, and I started digging into the economy, started looking into that very curiously, got a little worried by what I saw coming. I saw signs that the United States economy was on an unsustainable trajectory. I could see that. And the more curious I got, the more I started developing another part to this story, which is understanding how different pieces fit together, including energy, environmental concerns. And Roland, by the time all of this came together for me, I was so worried about the direction the world was going that I ended up quitting my job as a vice president. I started a blog, terrible business move right there. Don't ask me for business advice, right? But I had to tell people about what I was seeing. And for the last 10 years, my job has been, and now this became a very successful company for me. I am now CEO of Peak Prosperity, which has a lot of material we're going to cover today. We'll only get to a little bit of what we have in our offering at our website, but I come to you and I'm sitting here today because I got really curious. I took a big risk in my life and I decided to figure out what was going on in the world, and my mission is to create a world worth inheriting. There's a huge set of changes that are already started. It's not coming, it's already started if you know where to look. And so my work today, after all of this, is to gather data like the scientist I used to be, turn it into stories that people can understand, which was what I did when I was in strategy, and then help people understand what they can do about this and where the world's going.
Alrighty, you have some little bit of echo. People are saying, can you take your sound a little bit quieter?
A little quieter?
Absolutely. Yeah, so good. I really love your mission to create the world worth inheriting. And can you a little bit say more about that? What do you exactly mean by that? What is behind that statement?
I'd love to. Just let me know again if the sound needs adjusting. I've turned it way down, so.
Now I hear you you're quiet too.
We'll get it right, okay? How's this? Let me know. You just put your thumb up or down, and I'll just keep turning it up or down, okay? So the world clearly is headed in a direction where we, the people who are alive, people who are listening to this right now, we have a very special role in where the world is going, because we're the first generation ever that's running up against the hard limits of the world. We see this in anything we read about environmentally, where whole water tables are disappearing from billions of people, where the soil is disappearing that we literally eat from, that the number of species on the planet are going away. These are all things that we have to figure out how we're going to live with the natural world, with the larger world, so that we can have a prosperous economy, so that our children will have opportunities, so that we can leave behind a world that's better than the one we found. And that's entirely possible, but not the direction we're heading in right now. We're heading in a direction that clearly is going to leave behind a worse world, and that's a big problem. So can it be fixed? Absolutely. What we have to do is we have to get a new story about how we're going to inhabit the world. So it's really a big thing for us alive to figure out, how do we change our story from, and if the old story was we have to have economies that just grow constantly, what's the new story? Well, the new story is, how do we live the most prosperous existence we possibly can? Those can be separate stories entirely. And so that's really the mission of what we're about, is how do we change our larger story that we live into? Because we're humans. Stories are what drive us. And so that's really our highest mission, is to figure out how to change the story, because the good news is people can be incredible agents of abundance. We can create more abundance than we would understand, but we have to be intelligent about it. We have to approach the world intelligently. And the old ways aren't working anymore, so it's time for some new ways.
That's really great. And I like that you're doing that work that a lot of people, or really few people do that. So, and then this is really, I really admire that and appreciate what you're doing. And so I could ask you, like, if you take, like, what is wrong in the world in general? Like, what is the problem? Like, there's a lot of problems going on, but what are the main things that you see that's problematic in the world at the moment?
Well, let's start here. I look at three big areas: the economy, energy, and then the environment. So let me just look. You ask a question where there are some problems. Let's just look in the economy for a minute. And first, before I tell you what I see as a problem, I'm going to define something. Problems have solutions. Predicaments only have outcomes. So to give you an example, people say, oh, what's the problem with Japan? Why isn't Japan's economy growing? Well, it's not a problem. They have a predicament. Japan is the world's largest island retirement colony. They are losing population, and their population is aging rapidly. That's not a prescription for economic growth. In fact, if they were intelligent, they would be trying to engineer a shrinking economy to meet the shrinking needs of their particular demographic situation. That's just the reality for Japan, but they're pretending as if they can fix this, so it's a problem. So problems have solutions, right? So if they just throw more money in, or they print more yen, or if they can just help the exporters, that somehow they'll fix something that really isn't fixable. Instead, they should really be understanding where they are in their story. Japan, unless they radically change their immigration policies, and they probably won't, they're going to be facing the loss of half their population in the next 50 years. So that's a predicament. It's not a problem. So they're trying to figure out how to solve that. And that's just a small story about why I think Japan is going about their fixing all wrong. But here's the problem with that story, is if you attempt to fix something that's not fixable, you usually make it worse. So Japan, by printing more and more yen, is trying to weaken its currency, thinking that will solve something. And my prediction is that someday Japan will succeed beyond its wildest imagination, and they will absolutely ruin their currency. And that's going to be an enormous problem for a lot of people. It's going to hurt very badly. But that's because they're applying the wrong solution to a different predicament. That's where they face it right now. So if you ask me, just Chris, 3 words, you only get 3 words, tell me what the main predicament of the world economically is. It's too much debt. The world, the United States, Europe, China, Japan, all have been borrowing debt at more than twice the rate that our income has been growing for the past 50 years, 45 years, depending on who we're talking about. You can't borrow it. You personally, nobody listening to this can borrow at a rate faster than their income is growing, right? Your debts are constantly compounding at 10%, but your income's only growing at 5%. That's a math problem. It breaks. That's what broke in 2008. Wasn't a housing bubble in the United States. That was a side bubble. The big thing is that we have a worldwide credit bubble. It's the largest humanity has ever seen. If I'm right, if Robert Kiyosaki is right, if other people who look at this carefully are right, what's going to happen is what always happens when credit bubbles expand and then burst. There will be an enormous amount of economic pain. The problem is that our leaders in the Federal Reserve, in the European Central Bank, in the UK, Bank of England, all of that, they don't understand this yet, and they're just trying to get more people borrowing more money, and they don't care if it's governments borrowing or private individuals or corporations. They want to keep that borrowing train going, and it can't work anymore. That's why the story is so uncomfortable, and that's, if somebody said again, tell me why we're facing a really big predicament right now, it's because we have too much debt, and the people in charge are just trying to keep that going. They're sustaining the unsustainable. It will end at some point, and when it does, it's going to be a pretty painful moment.
Yeah, this is what's happening all over the world. The thing is that we have also one person asking here, Jonathan, is in Estonia, for example, we actually don't have national debt at the moment. So Estonia, we have even some reserves. So, but what would you say? Like, someone might think this doesn't affect us. So, but what can you say about that?
Yeah, so it's going to affect everybody, and the reason is that the world is now a global economy. So if you buy a smartphone, that probably has components that were manufactured in places that are 30,000 miles apart, right? The chips are manufactured here, those small motherboards are manufactured there, the screen is manufactured over there, it's all shipped and assembled over here and then shipped and sold over there. So we all live in this worldwide global economy. The predicament we're in is that if the United States, Europe, Japan, probably China, go down this path of having that pile of too much debt collapse on them, it's going to drag down the entire world economy. Things will become very difficult to source. It will ruin a lot of existing businesses. A lot of the financial service businesses out there simply won't have a function anymore if this pile tips over and breaks. So it really will affect everybody on this globe, because Estonia doesn't live entirely by what Estonia makes anymore. Nobody does. And so the extent to which we're all dependent on each other in this global thing can have big impacts. The other way it can really affect people is if you have stocks or bonds or what are traditionally sold to us as investments that could be impacted by this larger event when it happens. And so, I hope we get to talk about how we think this event's going to unfold. But if there is a global crisis of some kind, another financial 2008 but worse, it's really going to drag down everybody's prospects for a while. And those who are not ready for that, you might find that your currency goes through some wild fluctuations, either gets too weak or too strong, depending on how capital flows. Either one of those circumstances will affect you. You might find it difficult to either buy things because they either became too expensive or not available, depending on how things go. So it's a really uncertain time, and that's why the key word, like when we talk about how people should prepare for this, is it's to become resilient, right? You want to have reserves. You want to be ready to, it's kind of like, instead of standing straight upright with both your feet together, we want you to have your feet spread apart a little bit, your knees bent. You should just be ready for what's coming next, because every time the world has seen a country get into the kind of debt difficulty we see, it has always been extremely painful for the people in that country. The difficulty this time is this affects the whole world. This is a worldwide phenomenon this time.
Yeah, this really is like this. What I heard, like the difference between like having something happening in one country and the crisis at the moment we're having, this is global, and the printing debt, the printing money has never been in this global version like it is today. And can you also say like what is actually driving this economic boom? Because there's like a lot of people are saying that, oh well, the businesses are going better, and that makes sense that the stock market is going like that. And but what is actually driving this go like that, dude?
Well, in the stock market, this is pretty easy to understand. So the central banks got really scared by 2008. In fact, if you read back, you discover that we were this close, really within a matter of hours, of having 4 key banks in England be taken down by the crisis. That would have spread all the banks, the whole banking system, because it's all meshed, would have gotten taken down. It would have ceased to function. So they got a little scared by that. They said, wow, that was almost a systemic meltdown. And you have things like Mervyn King, then governor of Bank of England, saying that's how close we were. It was then Treasury Secretary John Paulson saying the same thing. Hank Paulson, sorry. So you had these big people who were close to it going, wow, the whole thing almost like went poof, right? So because they got scared by that, we are now in the most unusual period of history where the combined balance sheets of all the major central banks, think of all of them, the Swiss National Bank, the European Central Bank, Bank of England, Bank of Japan, United States, etc., their balance sheets went from about 4 trillion to 16 trillion. They dumped about $12 trillion into the markets. And so what happens when you do that and you drive interest rates really low? They specifically were trying to drive asset prices up, including stocks and bonds, with a couple of policy intents. They wanted stocks to go higher because they thought that's like the tail wags the dog. They're thinking if stocks go higher, people feel richer, they spend more, we get out of this mess we're in. That was part one of their plan. Part two is by buying bonds, they drive down the yield on those bonds lower and lower so people will borrow more. And they did, but you know who borrowed the most? It was corporations. They borrowed hand over fist, and of course they did. Every CFO should have done this or been fired. I totally understand why they did this, but they borrowed money at 1% and then bought back their shares, which were yielding a dividend of, say, 2.3%. Do that trade all day long. It's like minting money, plus it drives your stock price up. So the major buyer of equities over the past year and a half has been corporations buying their own stocks. Anything wrong with that? Well, every time corporations have done this in the past, they've always done it at the wrong time. They've always overdone it, and then they've had to really pay for that in the years that followed. Many companies go out of business because they end up with a lot of debt on the books, and they went into debt so that they could borrow, and buy their shares back. When the economy turns, and it always does, there's always periods of boom and bust, recessions and boom times. When the recessions come, that's when you find out which companies have borrowed too much. So when we see all the stock market going up, 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 you have to understand that's because there are these giant liquidity flows that the central banks have been pouring into the market. So what we're tracking is, yep, we said that's going to happen. We knew that's what they were going to do. This has gone on longer than I thought. But the central banks now find themselves unable to put enough money in to get anything to go any higher. And in fact, things are starting to stall. And so our prediction is that with all of the debt out there, including margin debt by small investors, including all the additional liquidity by all the big corporations buying, including everybody who's just gone crazy to be in this market, that all reverses. And when it does, we're going to enter this with the highest levels of debt on the books. And that just means that it's going to be an interesting downturn. So we're at peak prosperity. We think that it's an enormous mistake for central banks to try and print prosperity. They throw money in. Everybody feels good for a while. The central banks feel like heroes because they prevented an accident or something, but it always is a false prosperity. Real prosperity is people and companies investing for the future in themselves, in their skills, in their property, plant, equipment, research and development. On that front, corporations have been spending almost nothing on R&D, some of the lowest levels we've seen in decades. They've just been doing financial gains. So we look at this rising stock market as not the sign that it should be. It's kind of a false sign, and it's courtesy of central banks printing trillions of dollars.
And what about the energy thing? And then what you were saying as well is that the growth we're having now is is coming from the oil that we're taking out of our earth, and then it's coming to the end of or getting to the peak of how much we can actually get out of the oil with a reasonable price. And so can you a little bit give an overview or share about that as well? So because I think that's really important part as well.
Absolutely. This is really critical. So I can talk all day about the economy, and we can go into finance and all that stuff, but an economy has no value. It won't work unless you have energy driving it. And you need cheap energy. Everything we know about how the world works in our economies is courtesy of cheap oil that we found back in the 60s, right? That was the year, 1960 was the decade when the world found the most oil. We found all these big giant fields in the Middle East and found all the ones, you know, in the North Sea. We found all these giant fields, and they were easy to get to. They weren't that far down, and the cost to get a barrel of oil out of the ground in Saudi Arabia from those finds is about $5. That's pretty cheap. Now, today we see, well, we're still finding oil, but look at like the shale oil, the miracle in the United States. That costs $75 or $80 to get that out of the ground, minimum. I think it actually costs closer to $100 if we really examine those energy companies' statements correctly. The world doesn't grow as fast on $100 a barrel oil, and it can't, just because oil represents the source of energy for an economy. And what matters is not how much you get out of the ground, but how expensive it is, because expensive means it's telling you something about that oil. So here's what it's saying. When the Saudi Arabians are pulling oil out of the ground, it costs them maybe 1 barrel of oil to pull 100 out of the ground. So we say, oh, it costs them $5 a barrel. When the United States is doing it in the shale plays, it probably takes 1 barrel of oil to get just 5 barrels out of the ground. And that's why it's so much more expensive. It costs more energy to get energy. Look at the Canadian tar sands. They are literally turning over an area the size of a large state, flipping the ground over to pressure wash some really hard, nasty stuff off of sand. It's a really expensive process, and those two actions tell us that the age of cheap oil is over. The price of oil might go down, but here's my next prediction for everybody listening. We saw so far about $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion worth of upstream oil investment get wiped off the books in the last year and a half. These are big companies. It's Exxon, it's Total, it's Eni, it's all the big major international oil companies. It's all the miners. They are not putting money into finding more oil because they can't do it at current prices. Well, while they're not finding new oil, the oil we are getting out of the ground, those reserves are depleting. That is, we're getting less and less oil out of those. So we're not even finding enough to offset the fall in oil, so there will be less oil available in the future. Probably about 2 years out, maybe 3. So in 2 or 3 years, the prediction is easy to make. Because we're not spending that money today, because the price of oil has fallen below the cost that is required to get new oil out of the ground, we are not going to have those flows available to us in the future. And oil is everything to the economy. If you want your economy to grow, you have to have more oil. We don't have a single example of a large economy that's violated that. And just if you want to know why that's true, just look around. Try and find one thing around you, anybody listening to this, one thing that didn't get there directly or indirectly with oil. And by the way, I'm walking oil because my food that I eat is grown with petroleum, shipped to me with petroleum, and refrigerated using fossil fuels. I mean, I'm walking everybody. So even I didn't get here without oil by walking. So this is an amazing, amazing story, and it's so astonishing that the world is not talking about this really aggressively, because if we get to a point of not having enough oil in the future, there's only 2 ways that we know that a country can get oil that it needs when it's in short supply. One is to pay a lot more for it than somebody else, and the other is to go to war for it. Those are really, every war in history has been a resource war. So you watch what's happening in the Middle East right now. That's all happening because Russia's there, China's there, the United States and Europe are all there. Why? Because that's where the last best known low-cost reserves of oil are in the whole world. So that's how I understand what's happening over there right now. And so that's something that's going to really drive events over the next few years, particularly in 2 to 3 years, when the lack of investment today creates a shortfall in the future.
Then there's like, but why the oil price is still going down at the moment? Tarmo is asking at the moment because you say that they have to pay more to get it out, but the prices are going down. Why you see that? Why you see that happening?
Yeah, the price is going down because right now we have a supply overage. We have a little bit more supply than we have demand. But this isn't just an oil story. So if you said only the price of oil is going down, I will tell you that's a very bad sign for those who are hoping to see that the world economy is growing. Because if the world economy was growing, there wouldn't be any extra supply. It would all be used up. And so now I turn my attention to China. China has been hands down the #1 source of all new demand growth for oil in the past 10 years. It just, nobody else comes close. In fact, China is now the #1 importer of oil, having taken over that role from the United States, but it's really stopped increasing its imports. But don't just look at oil. Look at the price of copper, which China uses about half of the copper in the world. Look at the price of coal. Again, China uses about half the coal in the world. Look at the price of iron ore. All of these base commodities that are the engines of growth for a developing economy like China have all collapsed in price. And so that tells me that what we have right now is a situation where China is not growing 7%. It's actually shrinking. And this is an enormous difficulty for the world, because when China gets in trouble, which it will soon, it's going to export its problems to the rest of the world, meaning it will weaken its currency, and it will sell things for cheaper than anybody else can possibly sell them for, because their currency is cheaper now, and it will export this deflation, which the world is all scared about right now. So, you know, seeing where these commodities are telling me that we're in a contraction phase right now. We're not expanding anymore. We're in contraction phase. So the price of oil can easily go up or down depending. So if tonight demand for oil suddenly went up by 2 million barrels a day, that oversupply would all go away and the price would shoot right back up, which, by the way, is a very thinkable number if we were back in economic expansion. So keep your eye on these commodities, because they're like a windsock that tells you which way the wind is blowing. And they're saying right now that the world is in contraction phase, so that's a caution note.
So what do you see happening next? What are your view on the future? So we have stock prices going up, real estate prices going up, oil is going down, gold and silver going down. So where it's all leading?
Where it's all leading. So listen, this is it's got a lot of moving parts to this story, but here's the simple view. All this money was printed, and it did create a big expansion. The emerging market economies were doing great, right? Because they usually have the biggest gain from all of this. And as the emerging market economies are doing great, they have this wonderful moment because the central economies drive their interest rates down, so people with money go, oh, I like these Brazilian bonds at 8%, right? Those are tasty. You know, I can only get 2% over here in Italy's bonds. So they go and they buy Brazil's bonds. So Brazil's currency gets strengthened, and their interest rates fall, and people are buying all their soybeans and other things they've got, and it's fantastic. And then things turn around, and you see the opposite of that, where you see that, oops, the liquidity of the world starts to shrink again. It goes through this third thing, and the emerging market economies get hammered, right? Look at Brazil today. It's probably up for a default, along with Venezuela, who's already in full-blown social anarchy and hyperinflation. If you haven't studied Venezuela, bad things going on there right now. So what we're looking for here is peak prosperity. We like this model. It's called the Kapoom theory. Eric Jansen of iTulip, I read this, he put it out in like 1998 or something. And it's a theory that says first you expand everything, you have this giant expansion in credit, but the next thing that happens is it implodes. It goes right? Like boom, and then it's going to explode. So this part is what's starting, that implosion. That's what the central banks are fighting. It's why the Federal Reserve couldn't even think about raising interest rates a quarter of a point, because they're scared of this dynamic happening. we're seeing it in falling prices all over the place. It's the deflationary impulse that happens first. And so when this happens, people get scared again. Remember, like when 2008 happened, people got scared. So our view is that we're going to see that that impulse, that Ka part, it's already starting. It started in China. We're seeing it in the commodity price collapse. We're seeing it in the emerging market disasters that are happening that include not just Brazil. Look at South Africa where that's at. Look at what's happening in some of the rim countries in Africa. Look at what's going on in Singapore, Malaysia. This is happening all over. So it started, and the question is, how far does it proceed before we get to the next stage of this, which is when the central banks finally feel like they have enough political cover to do the next part of this story. And there's 4 competing ideas on the table for what the central banks are going to do next. If this is essential, because when these things happen, not if, but when they happen, you have to know what to do. You have to be positioned. You have to be mentally tough. You got to have your finances in order, because this next stage is when the central banks freak out, and they only have 2 options that are serious at this point. One is to go to negative interest rates. That means that they're going to take, they'll offer minus 1.5% for say to the banks from the central bank, and then the banks will go, oh my gosh, and they'll start offering people minus 2.5% on their checking accounts. And so what's going to happen with that? Well, people will take all their money out of the bank. So the first thing that we're calling for, if they go down that route, is they have to ban cash, obviously. That way nobody can escape the plan, right? We're already seeing lots of trial balloons floating around out there of central banks talking about banning cash. Denmark is probably the first country that's going to get there all on its own, but the central banks of England, Europe, and a couple other countries have started to already talk about that route. But there's a second route that could happen. By the way, my advice, if we go down that route and they start banning cash, is to just go out and get your money out of the banking system however you have to. Put it into businesses, take it out in cash if that's available as an option, buy gold, whatever, just get it out. Because otherwise you're going to have a guaranteed loss going forward. The second thing they might do is called helicopter money. That's where they put money directly into your checking account, or they give you a tax holiday for this year and a rebate for last year, or whatever. But this means the central banks print money and they send it to you somehow, either through your government via a tax break or directly into your checking account, however. If that happens, that's where we get to the POOM part of this story, the explosion part. My advice then is run, don't walk, to all the things that you have on a pre-prepared list of things that you would like to own as tangible assets, and go and buy them as fast as you can. This is properties, apartments, productive enterprises, Stradivarius violins, gold, anything that isn't nailed down, because we know what happens on the next part of this story. When banks go to the direct printing of money and handing it to people, it's impossible to stop that dynamic. It's called Venezuela. He who buys first wins in this story. So you have to know where we are in the story and which direction we're going, but let's be clear, the central banks are approaching wild, cornered animal stage. They've gotten themselves into a really dark spot. They don't know how to get out of it, and they're going to try some crazy stuff that in history has never worked before. But that's not going to stop them from trying it again, because they have to do something, right? So that's our view, is that now is the time to understand how these big macro pieces are coming together, because this is a once in a lifetime. In fact, this has never happened before in history across the globe. So this is a really exciting moment. Going to be a lot of losers and a bunch of winners. Unfortunately, the way this usually works is there's more losers than winners in these stories. But when the dust settles, what's going to happen at the end of this? You know, currencies will be ruined, and some countries will actually fold and have to reform themselves. And when the dust settles, people will wake up and they'll go, "That was terrible. All my wealth got destroyed." And that's the language people are going to use. But instead, if you watch carefully, you'll see what actually happened was the real wealth got transferred. It got transferred from person A to person B. And our work is to help people understand this dynamic so you can be on the right side of that line, so that wealth comes towards you, doesn't flow away from you. And that's our view of how the world is unfolding right now.
I really like the kaboom theory, because it really made a picture for me how it's really working, because there's a lot of people saying that they're printing a lot of money and there should be hyperinflation coming because there's more money coming in, but the kaboom theory that it's first is the implosion, or as I made the parallel, like it's like something like when tsunami is coming. Before the tsunami hits the coast, the water goes away from the coast first, and then comes with a huge wave. Is it? Do I get it? Do I get it?
Exactly right.
Exactly right. Okay. So in that terms, what is something that actually let's get into this stocks thing, and actually the you say that the primary, secondary, and tertiary wealth, so people get the idea of like, well, why the stock market is not a good idea to be in at the moment. So I think this is as well a really important thing. So let's get into that as well. So
Great.
Can you
Great. This is important.
share
really
share
important.
us a bit?
So the question comes, what do we mean when we say wealth? Right? So we've been sold, marketed to our whole lives that wealth is money, currency, it's cash in the bank. It's things like stocks, bonds. You know, if you own a lot of those assets, you're rich or wealthy. The truth is that we have to understand, so here's how we look at wealth. Wealth actually is, let's imagine I have $1 billion in cash on a pallet. You know, am I wealthy? Yeah, totally. But not if I'm in the middle of the Saharan desert and I have nothing, right? I have cash, which maybe I could set it on fire and a plane would see me, but it has no value. So money itself has no value unless we can spend it on things. Apartments, yachts, a good meal. So when we really look at this, we understand that actually wealth comes in different forms. Primary wealth is the primary wealth of the land, right? It's rich soils that could be farmed. It's thick stands of timber that could be turned into lumber. It's ore in the ground that's concentrated that we could take out and turn into metals. It's fossil fuels in the ground. It's things like that. That's primary wealth. And only like 150 years ago, if you asked anybody who's the wealthiest person around, you would know. You'd say, oh, it's that guy. He owns the most land, right? Land was primary wealth, and it was the means of production, so people who had the land were wealthy. Then there's another thing, though. You know, rich soil all by itself, it's primary wealth, but it's not. It has to be transformed first for it to be useful to us humans. So it gets turned into food, right? Food is a form of secondary wealth. Secondary wealth is when we transform that primary wealth into the things that humans want. We bring it to market. So secondary wealth is the lumber I mentioned. It's fish that's on the plate. It's metals that have been refined. But it's also the means of production. So if you either own primary wealth, which could be a thick seam of coal, or all the equipment that is required to produce that coal and bring it to market, that's the secondary wealth. But then you sell that coal in the market, and what happens? Well, you sell it for money. And money, stocks, bonds, all the paper things are actually claims on wealth. Money is a claim on real wealth. So I can use my money to buy coal. Awesome, right? So money then becomes a claim on wealth, and debt is a claim on future money, right? If I owe $100,000 on a mortgage, it means that over the next 20 years, the bank has a claim on my money over the next 20 years. That's what a debt represents. So when we look at this, here's where the story is fascinating. As long as your claims and the real wealth are in balance, everything's fine. And if they are, you neither see inflation nor deflation, right? Those people think inflation, deflation is rising prices or falling prices. It's not prices, that's the symptom. Inflation or deflation means there's either too much money or too little, chasing goods and services. So as we watch this, we're watching the central banks just print up monstrous amounts of claims. There's now $200 trillion of debt sitting in the developed world right now. It's an astonishing number. It's gone up by 57 trillion just since 2008. These numbers are so big, nobody can make sense of them, but it represents $57 trillion worth of new future claims that have been layered on our economy, and it's an astonishing number. So what we're tracking is watching money, stocks, and bonds just grow and grow and grow, but they have no value unless there's an equal amount of primary and secondary wealth. These over here are not growing. In fact, they're shrinking now in most cases, right? Because we're seeing that there's less and less primary wealth in the ground. There's less and less secondary wealth because of that, but still we're growing this part. This is where the kaboom theory comes in, because the first thing is this starts to get crushed a little bit. And then all of it tries to get over into real wealth. So we saw this. From 1918 to 1923 in Weimar, Germany, they directly printed money and had that extraordinary period of hyperinflation. And you read a book about that period, and it will tell you that everybody got wiped out. Everybody's wealth got destroyed. Oh, it was a terrible time. What happened was their stocks became worthless over time, their bonds became worthless over time, and their currency became worthless over time. But note what happened in this story. Did the number of cars, houses, acres of arable farmland, hotels, factories, did any of those change? The answer is no. They were all still there. That was the real wealth of the nation. So who owned it, though, that changed big time. So while everybody's talking about how the people of Weimar Germany got wiped out because too many of them are over here with all their claims in the tertiary stocks, bonds, paper, what really happened was who owned the actual productive assets of the nation changed hands. And of course, Germany went on to become an economic powerhouse again and again on those same real assets. So this is our lesson here, is don't confuse wealth with stocks and bonds and currency. Understand that there are whole periods of time in history where people get really fascinated with paper, and then they realize, whoops, too much of that, and then they get really fascinated with things again, primary and secondary wealth. The trick is to make sure that you own these before everybody tries to squeeze through that door, because that'll happen. It'll happen. It happened before. I don't know when exactly it's going to happen, but we're seeing all of the pressure signs building for it to happen again.
So this is the main reason for saying that the greatest wealth transformation in the history is yet to come.
Yes.
Can you a little bit given some distinctions or ideas around that? So why they say that?
So this is inevitably what happens is, imagine so you're the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, and you have 850 billion under management, and it's all in tertiary assets. It's all in stocks or bonds or currencies. Or you're just a fabulously wealthy person, and like everybody who's fabulously wealthy, you have all your wealth in stocks, in bonds, and currencies. And so what happens is, that's fine. Everybody's happy with that until one moment. We don't know when that moment is, but it's kind of like something changes, and all those really big concentrated pockets of wealth say, oh, I have to own real stuff, right? And they all try and go and buy real stuff because it's like a new idea that they all have. And all of a sudden they find there isn't enough real stuff, and it starts to explode in price, right? Like if you're Norway and you said, oh, I want $100 billion, I want it in gold and silver and land. Almost impossible to begin to do that without absolutely driving the price of everything you're trying to buy through the roof and destroying your whole strategy. So the interesting thing is, we work with a lot of very wealthy people, and we see that already many of them are diversifying. So the largest landholder in Southeast America right now is Bill Gates. He's taking all of his paper wealth and he's converting it into mostly rangeland for cattle and also some timberland. You look at the endowment for Yale University, they are the largest owner of forest land in New England. So for me, here's my personal strategy. I personally put a lot of my wealth into gold in 2001 when it was about 300 an ounce. And then I traded some of that for real estate in about 2009. And I'm watching one thing very carefully here. The price of forested land in my area here is starting to come down, and it's going to cross over where I will be able to trade 1 ounce of gold for 1 acre of land. And the reason I want to do this is because those trees represent energy. They are actually one of the only forms of energy production that we have here in my neck of the woods. We don't have gas, we don't have coal, we don't have oil. We've got a little bit of hydro. But these trees represent the future energy source. And I'm confident, 100% confident, that someday oil is going to shoot back up in price. People around me are going to say, oh, should I burn oil for heat or should I burn wood? And they're going to want to burn wood. So I am going to take this gold that I've got and or paper dollars that I've got, and I'm going to trade them for timberland. And the great thing about timberland is, even when you're not cutting it down, the trees are still growing. So it's almost like a coupon on a bond. they will increase their mass by 6 or 7% a year. So it's kind of like you have an asset that's growing at 6 or 7% a year, and so that's an example of how I feel like, why haven't I done that yet? Because I think the Ka part's coming. I think I'm going to be able to buy forest land really cheaply in the next, let's say within the next 3 years. And I'm going to take a significant portion of my wealth, and I will probably borrow money too to do that, so that I can buy as much as I possibly can, because then when the next part of this story starts, where everything starts to explode in price, the rich people figure out that they all have to own forest land, when oil goes back up in price, when money printing finally creates a lot of inflation, he who buys first wins. So there are examples like this in every single place I've gone to. I mentioned trees because that's where I live. That makes sense where I live. Other places, it could be water. It could be farmland. It could be the means of production. There are so many good, solid, cash flow positive ideas that will make sense no matter what happens, unless things really go really crazy. But that will always make sense, because people always want to eat. They always want to be warm. They always want to have fun. We always want to smile. All those things will be true no matter what happens. So owning the things that can bring that to people is really where we're focusing our efforts.
And that's good. And sharing your ideas and what you are doing. So we in Estonia, we have also a lot of woodland, and we have also this good soil and the land where we grow stuff. So and the thing that we're seeing here is happening is I see that as probably happening in a lot of places. A lot of people go in when the bubble is about to burst. And what I see is happening is the city bubbles coming, because people are moving from the primary lands, like from where they grow the trees and all the groceries. They're moving to the cities, and this is like how I see that. This is kind of they're going into the bubble and moving away from the land that's really rich, and also this price is going down because of that. So this gives good opportunities to buy these things. So what are some other tips or ideas you can tell people, and how do you prepare yourself for this the upcoming times?
So this is in our Adam Taggart and I have a book coming out in about 3 weeks or so. It's called Prosper, and we have a lot of tips in that. And so here's the basic framework that we're working with. So usually when we tell people how the world works, and if people go to our website, they could watch, they probably should, watch something called the Accelerated Crash Course. It's 53-minute video, lots of charts, lots of data. It moves along pretty quick, lots of pretty pictures that will help explain this larger view of the world. And it puts together the economy, energy, the environment, puts it in one nice tight spot. So people should watch that. And if you do, people come out of that for the first time usually, and they go, oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do with my money? So we think having your financial capital really well controlled is really important. So in this book, we start with financial capital, and we say, look, you have to really understand what your financial circumstances are. You should, do usual things like really form a budget, really look at where you are, really take a good hard look at your personal balance sheet, and your income statement, right? Like, what are my assets? What are my liabilities? Where's my money going? Just know that stuff really cold. And then think about how you're going to preserve that as carefully as you can. And a portion of this, though, some portion of your overall net worth needs to go into becoming resilient. And so there are other forms of capital. So we look at it as if there are 8 forms of capital. Financial capital is just one, very important. But another one, which I mentioned, would be your emotional capital. So here, one of the stories that we look at is that when the USSR dissolved in 1989, for the next 8 years in Russia, 54% of all the deaths recorded in Russia in that next 8 years 54% were from alcohol. And so what happened was mostly middle-aged guys who lost their jobs, didn't see any opportunities, and just decided to drink instead. And what they missed out on was that was actually one of the most explosive periods of capital formation and wealth transfer in Russia's entire history. It was an amazing period. What was the difference between the people who saw that opportunity and went and grabbed that, and the people who drank themselves every day on the park bench was the story they had in their head. One group has the emotional resilience to say, "Woo, this is an opportunity." Another group is like, "Oh, this is all broken. I don't know what to do." Right? The difference is the story. So emotional capital is something people can build up so that you are emotionally resilient, so that when the turbulent times come, you actually see the opportunity in that. You're not frozen, right? So there's a lot of different ways to go about that, but you could take some of your financial capital and use it to start building your emotional capital, right? So that's one example. Living capital is another form. So if I turned this all around and I showed you my yard, it used to be a regular suburban house, and we cut down a bunch of trees and I put in a huge garden, and I have grapevines and I have an orchard. I got some chickens running around, and every year I buy a whole lot of compost, which costs me money, and I make my soil richer and deeper. Now, that surrounds me with beauty right now, and I love living around. I love the great quality food I eat off of this, but what I'm really doing is I'm building up the living capital, and this makes me more wealthy. And over the long term, that could be a really, really handsome payout for me. Like, this could be a really important asset to have. Material capital. I have right now, for me, here's an idea of an investment. I don't think of investment as sending my money to Wall Street anymore. I think of an investment like this. I investigated how my hot water is created in my house. It turns out it burns 1/3 of the fuel in my house is used just to heat water. So turns out the sun heats stuff really well. I bought myself a set of solar thermal panels, not very sexy, just boxes that heat water, and I ended up saving nearly all of that 1/3 of my energy costs, and that investment's going to pay itself back in just 8 years. So it has an 8-year payback, but the life of the system is a 25-year life system, so it actually has an internal rate of return that's well over 100%. So where can you get 100% investment returns? Well, by rethinking investments, and we have at our website all kinds of ideas for different ways you can get very solid returns for your personal self by investing in your material capital that in where you actually live. So those are just a few of the examples, but really when we say if you can build your resilience in each one of these 8 forms, all 8, then you are far more resilient. And the best part is you're going to live healthier, happier, surrounded by more natural beauty, and you're probably going to be wealthier, and you've had great financial returns. So no matter what future comes, this to me is how I'm going to live. Like, if you could say, Chris, rewind, start over, I would do this, but I would do it faster because now I know how to do it, and now I know why I'm doing it. I don't become resilient to avoid something like a crisis. I do it because it makes me happier today and provides an incredible buffer between me and the world if things go crazy. So, quick example. We use in my family now half the oil that we used to use with no change in our lifestyle because we made certain investments. So that means if the price of oil doubles, I am half as impacted by that as my neighbor, right? So I have lots of investments like that structured all throughout so that I am more resilient, and think of investing now as both ways where I get money back, or I invest today to prevent spending as much money in the future. Both ways to invest. Very good. So there's lots of concrete examples like that, and that's, I'll tell you, like, big investment was becoming healthy. And I lost a bunch of weight, and there's a lot of data out there now on how foods can make us healthy or unhealthy, and you can go out and get a blood test to tell you specifically for you exactly what your fingerprint is of things that you might need to change or modify. I did those things. I feel great, and I did that in part because, I think if under certain future scenarios I can imagine I'd rather be fit than fat, but really it helps me feel better today. So everything we recommend is something that will actually improve your life today, while also providing great benefits potentially for a future that we all hope doesn't come. But if it does, you'll be better off than the next person.
I can really recommend your book because I read your last book, The Crash Course, which was a really good book as well. And then I now read also one chapter, the financial capital part of your new book, The Prosper. And I really it really made like much more clear of the picture, like why the deflation is coming before the inflation, and so and what are the next steps that exactly to do. So can you confirm that? Did I understood correctly from that? Is that what you're saying is like at the moment it's good idea to get more, having more cash and having yours and having gold and silver and going out of stocks, and when the kaboom part hits, like the ka, which means it's kind of the wave is going away from the coast.
Yep.
Then you start turning your money into the primary wealth and secondary wealth, and when the boom comes, then this is the time where you're really prospering, and you're taking the wealth is coming towards you because you're placed in the right places. Did I understand correctly, or?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so what I'm advising, and I'll tell you, I don't advise anything I don't do myself. I am developing a list of things that I really want to buy when the time comes. I have a certain car in mind. Maybe I can get that really cheap. I have land that I'm looking at very carefully, but if the time isn't right, I'll know when the time is right. When the ka really happens, when that ka moment comes, people are going to be scared. Nobody's going to want to be buying anything, and hopefully I have my plan and my emotional fortitude in place to say now is the time. And it's going to be hard, right? Nobody wanted to buy anything in October 2008, right? But people who did pretty well. And this time we have to understand that the next thing that the Federal Reserve and other central banks are going to do is they're not just going to prop up the stock market. They're going to try and ignite inflation across everything because it's their last thing on their list of things they can try, except admitting that maybe their policies were a big mistake and we shouldn't borrow twice as fast as our income, right? Leaving aside them becoming sane, what's going to happen is pretty predictable. And so we just don't know when, so that's why building up a cash reserve today, right? Not holding unproductive debt, right? Have debt if it makes sense, if it cash flows, all of that, but don't hold unproductive debt, right? This isn't a time to go into debt to take a holiday or something like that. So this is a time to build cash reserves, get tough, and know what your next move is going to be when things become a lot more uncertain. And that to me is this I think when this kaboom happens, this is a once in a generation or maybe 10 generation moment to, if you do it right, to really position not just yourself but your family for a very long time to come, because these are when almost everybody's going to be paralyzed. Nobody's going to know what to do. The poor people who have all their money in stocks and bonds and cash are going to be very disappointed, right? But for those who can move at the right time, I think this represents an extraordinary opportunity. But first you got to get clear about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it.
Good. I'm glad that I got it.
Yeah, you did.
So, well, is there anything you can tell that when really the signs are going to go that the car part is coming? So is there something that you can tell now that when these things happen, we probably are going to enter the deflation part?
Yeah, so these are things we track very closely at my website, and the basic model is this. What we're looking for is remember, we're waiting for that expansion to start going the other direction. And so our model it's called from the outside in. When we watch these things break, they never break at the center. So don't look at U.S. Treasury market. That's the center of this whole thing. Don't look at U.S. stocks center. You have to look at the edges first. So it's kind of like the weak countries get in trouble first. The weakest people in a society end up on food stamps first, or government assistance. The weakest antelope is the one that the lions drag down. So we're always looking for where are the weakest players and what's going on. So we've been very interested tracking what's happening in Greece. We think that same story in Greece is obviously coming to Portugal at some point, Spain after that, then Italy, and so on. So we'll watch that progression. As it starts to pick up steam, that would be something we would watch. We're watching the credit markets very carefully, particularly the weak edges. So we're watching credit spreads on junk bonds. We're watching credit spreads on weak companies, things like that, because in 2008, we had a very early warning to what was happening and able to warn our subscribers that there was a big thing coming, because 2 weeks before everything broke apart out in the stock market, the credit markets were breaking underneath the surface, and it was very obvious what was happening. So we're watching the edges of all of this, and I will tell you it's already started. So just when you get off of this, go open the newspaper, look what's happening in Brazil right now. It's astonishing how fast they're collapsing. Or look at what's happening with giant companies like Glencore right now, or anybody who's involved in the commodity space or tied to China. Or look what's happening in China at this particular point in time. We're seeing all these signs, and they will pick up over time. So the good news is you always have some time, right? These things don't just happen overnight. We're watching this, and I would say that based on what I'm seeing, there's another 6 to 8 months of just sort of unraveling at the edges before things really pick up speed. Here's the hard part we can't predict in this story. Things happen a lot faster today than they used to because of computers, because everything's linked together, because what happens to the yen in the overnight market affects stock futures in the instant here, no matter what time of day it is in the United States. So we watch these things. They're all very, very connected. So our guess is it's going to, like when somebody asked Ernest Hemingway, I said, hey, how did you go broke? He said, slowly, then all at once. Right? That's kind of our model for this. We're looking at this as sort of, we're in the slow part of this, but it's going to speed up at some point. That's going to be when the fear comes in, right? And it's in the depths of that when we're expecting the central banks to come out and mail everybody money or do whatever they're going to do. And that's when we would tell you, run with whatever cash and your buy plan. Go, just go buy stuff at that point in time. Just figure it out later if you have to. But that would be the moment to really get out there. And hopefully you wouldn't do it as casually as that. Hopefully you'd have a good plan. You would know which assets you want. You would go out and you'd get them at that time, because that's how we would see this unfolding. But the main message is this: it's already underway. If you know where to look, just look at the outside.
But what do you see? Like we're entering into this huge crisis, and then there's the greatest wealth transformation in history, and the financial system that we're having at the moment, it's definitely not sustainable for too long. So what do you see? What's going to happen at the end of that, or what's going to happen next when we do the kaboom part? And so what do you see happening then?
Yeah, so the biggest problem, I mean, if we want to look at this right at the core, the issue is it all starts with our money system. So I spent a lot of time in my first book and all the video online things talking about the money system. Why? Why would I talk about the money system? Well, it's because it tells us a lot about why things are happening. We, Estonians, everybody in the world, we loan money into existence. It's just a facet of modern banking. All money is loaned into existence, which means that it needs to either expand exponentially or it collapses. Those are its two operating states. Our banking system is either expanding or threatening to collapse. It doesn't have a stable way of operating. And so what I would say, when, I don't know how many years this takes, but when it finally all settles down, 10 years, 30, I don't know, we're going to find that we don't run just one type of money system anymore. We run different types of money systems. Bitcoin's an early example of a money transfer system that's pretty elegant, right? And could bypass a lot of banking. But we're going to need to not use debt-based money anymore. We're going to have to use other forms of money. It's one of the prime reasons I hold gold is for the option value. It has option value embedded in it that at some point in the future, I don't know, that humans might go, wow, the gold standard was actually the only thing we knew about that auto-corrected for human weaknesses. Humans always want to defer pain to the future and get something today and pay for it tomorrow, right? That's just human nature. Debt-based money allows us to do that. Comes with some problems. It allows us to build up these huge imbalances, allows us to build this giant tertiary blob that swamps over everything. It goes off the rails from time to time. So we'll need other money systems, and gold is the only thing we know about that has worked in history. It's entirely possible we'll come up with something else, something different, something based on new technology. I don't know. But so I'm holding it, at least in part, for this one idea that it has some value, that it might get remonetized. And if it does, then it'll have a very different role in our lives. And a lot of people say, well, Chris, gold can't really be used because, if you have an ounce of gold, it's going to be worth like whatever, some crazy amount of money. What are you going to do, buy a loaf of bread with that? And I say, yeah, I will, because what our company has done is work with this other company that we create. This is something called an Aurum, and it's between two sheets of currency-grade laminate plastic, the same that you find in a Canadian dollar, and sandwiched between those two sheets. And this one is 1/10 of a gram of gold. So the gold could circulate, and it's in currency, and it's in very small form. There's maybe $4 worth of gold in this right now. So that's an example. But I think that we'll see lots of different forms of currency out there, that when things break down, people always will trade. We're going to need currencies. It's just that whole part of the story is going to really, really shift. There's going to be some extraordinarily incredible opportunities in and around that idea alone. We're going to need new payment systems, using new types of money. It probably will all be handled electronically in some way. That's where we see incredible changes coming. Or maybe it's that plus this, or that plus 12 other things. We don't know. But right now, the one thing that's truly unsustainable is a money system that has to constantly expand, or our banking system collapses. That's just a broken idea. And so that, I don't know when we figure that out as a species, but I've already figured it out. And oh, by the way, the people I work with who are financial industry titans, who are busy buying islands and things so they have a safe place to go, they're as scared as anybody I know right now. And they work really intimately on the inside of the system, and everybody has that feeling. Everybody listening to this probably knows that, like, something's not right. You know, something's a little off in this story. And what's off is that it's not working anymore. But our monetary authorities are just doing more and more and more of the stuff that already hasn't worked and got us in trouble in the first place. And that feels awkward, right? It doesn't feel good. So that's where we are in the story. So anybody who feels uncomfortable is simply just tells me they've been paying attention. The work now is to figure out why you're uncomfortable. So learn everything you can. That's my work in the world. And then figure out how to get yourself prepared so that you can take away the anxiety you might have. So if people are worried, my first piece of advice is, yeah, you know why you're worried? It's because you know something and you're not doing anything about it. In that gap between what you know and what you do, that's where anxiety lives. So get rid of it, right? It's not hard. Make your actions line up with what you already know to be true. And then once you get clear of that anxiety, now you're free to go enjoy your life and work on things that really need doing. So that's the basic advice we have for people. Close the gap. Just if you find yourself full of anxiety, there's stuff you can do about that. And usually it's as simple as this. You have to become prepared.
There's many things to learn from that. It's like what governments and the financial system is trying to do is solve the problem with the same strategy that's not working. And so the lesson from that is that don't do that in your personal life or business life. Try different things. Well, but we're living in a tremendous time because there's something big gonna happen, and nobody knows exactly. And it's really good that you have got into and really understood the model and what's going on there, and now sharing it because it's made much more easier for other people to make their own decisions regarding that. So this is one of the reasons we're doing also the Wealth Forum on end of October in Estonia. So bringing Robert Kiyosaki and some other people in business and investment, so people can get the knowledge and not be there alone, just thinking and basically being the losers in the wealth transformation that's coming. So it's up to you. You can be on one side or other side. So, and I think this is really good idea from you as well, to learn as much as possible at the moment and to get yourself prepared. And I really recommend again to get your book as well. So how's that possible? Actually, I understand it's coming out in 3 weeks. The Prosper book.
Yeah, so Prosper is coming out in about 3 weeks. It'll be showing up on Amazon shortly, so you could pre-order there. You could also, we're going to have let people pre-order through our website as well. And so you could either come to Peak Prosperity or go to Amazon. And it'll also be out an audiobook. We didn't do an audiobook for the crash course, but Prosper's coming out as an audiobook. And it should launch about the same time. So it would be pretty widely available. We're going to get it in bookstores and airport bookstores and other places. And we're using the same publisher as the Rich Dad folks, because they seem to do a really good job with bringing all that out and helping us through the process of bringing this information to the world. So yeah, either at our website or just on Amazon.
Alrighty, thank you, Chris, for sharing all that, and I think this is really important, and this is to get this message out and people to really start preparing for this. We still have some time. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I think so, but here's the thing: nobody knows for sure. You know, if my house burned down tonight, I would rebuild my preparations as fast as I could because I don't know when anything's going to happen. My personal suspicion is it's in the next 3 years or so, right? But could it be tonight? Is it 2 years? I don't know, and nobody does. So since we don't know, we should pretend as if it could happen at any moment. It's kind of like, you know, but it's crazy. There are people who live on earthquake faults in California, say, where they know that there's a big earthquake coming, and still only 3% of households living on the fault even have 48 hours of food and blankets and a couple flashlights in a closet, right? So most people won't prepare. And even when they know that there's a risk, that not a risk, it's a guarantee that at some point in the future there'll be an earthquake, right? So they just, you know, that's how they live with that, and they just tuck it away, but it creates a little anxiety under there, and our mission is to say, listen, don't do that, right? You can correct for those things, and by the way, we can be very much more resilient with our finances, with our wealth, the way we structure our businesses, with our health, with our social connections with each other, social capital, really big important thing. So all of that, we say just get on with it, and you'll find actually you will be enjoying life a lot more today and in a much better position for whatever happens in the future.
I like the saying you said back in US when we met that it's better to be, how was it? It's better to be 1 year early than 1 day late.
Yes.
That's something that really. So thank you, Chris, for coming here on the web and sharing us the ideas. And any last words you want to say?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really hope that I've reached some people listening to this. And listen, it's all about education at this point in time. There's a lot happening. The mainstream media is doing a very poor job of explaining really what's happening out there. So find out for yourself what's really happening, and most importantly, trust yourself. Don't trust me. Look at my stuff, look at all my data, but maybe you have a different view, or you find somebody who has a much different point of view. That's what's important in this. Trust yourself, and but don't trust what the big media are telling you at this point. It's not very helpful yet. So learn everything you can, and then do something about it, because knowledge without action is just a waste of time. So yeah, it's all about the learning, but it's really also all about the doing. It's that place, right? Learn and do. And so that's the advice at this point is it's time to take action. It's not time to just spend another year learning about stuff. So figure out just as much as you need to go and do something brand new and different about that. And that would be my closing words.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris, for being here, and thank you for sharing. I hope you got some great ideas about what's coming and how to prepare yourself. So, and thank you for being here with us, and see you soon. Bye-bye, Chris. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.